Hey friends, welcome back to another Monday morning watercolor tips video. My name's Emma Lefebvre, and here on this channel, I give you watercolor tips to start you off for the week. However, I think this might be my last Monday morning watercolor tips for a while. I don't know if I'm going to continue the series. I know you guys have enjoyed it. I've enjoyed doing it, but I feel like I've covered quite a range of topics, and I might take a break on it for a while. If you do have suggestions of future Monday morning watercolor tips videos that you'd like to see, let me know in the comments below and I can write them down for the new year. But I think this is, I know this is definitely going to be the last one for 2022 since we're only a few weeks away from there being a new year. So I might pick it back up in January. I don't know yet. But this is so far the last one. And for our last one, we are going to be covering how to paint a landscape from a reference photo. So I'm going to kind of show you my process, and we're only going to do really simple landscapes for this because it just takes too much time for an intricate one. And I'm also not that great at really detailed landscapes, by the way. But I'm just going to show you my process of how I take a photo of a landscape and apply it to a watercolor painting and my steps. So let's jump right in and get started. Okay, so I'm going to be doing two different examples of painting from a reference photo. These are not going to be long and detailed. Like I said, they're going to be simple, and I'm going to go pretty quickly, just not meaning that I'm going to go at like warp speed. I'm not going to take my time doing the details and stuff like that because I just kind of want to get my point across of how I approach these. And then we can take a look at other landscapes and I can just kind of talk you through how I might approach them. Okay, so for our first landscape is this one. Okay, and I'll also put them on the screen. And I got all of these off Pinterest, so I will link them below. Now, the first thing you want to do when you're doing any landscape, I would suggest taping down the background. So I've just taped down 2 squares. This way it just keeps it flatter and gives you a nice border too. But if you're painting on a loose sheet of paper, it just helps keep it flat. Because with landscapes, we're going to be covering the whole background with water. It's going to be pretty wet and that causes your paper to warp. So this just keeps it flatter while painting. Okay. So the first thing I always do when I'm looking at a reference photo is I look at the values, meaning I'm looking at the lighter areas versus the darker areas. With watercolor, you want to work light to dark always. Because watercolor is a transparent medium, you cannot layer light colors on top of dark colors unless you're using an opaque paint, which watercolor is not. So sometimes you can get away with using white watercolor. It's more on the opaque side, but it's still not opaque enough. Like if you're trying to do like a darker, I don't know, it doesn't work as well. So with watercolor, I always say go light to dark. So let's pick out the light values versus the dark values. So we can see here that the horizon line and this mountain right here is the lightest area. So we're going to lay down our sky and background first. Now, I also like to break down my landscapes from sky and land. It just kind of gives you a better idea of which areas to do. And usually you can do one at a time. So here I'm going to do the sky first, and then I'm going to move on to the land. And then the other thing I also look for is that if I am going to be layering anything on top of each other, will layering a certain color on top of another change the color? So like with glazing, which is basically just layering wet on dry, because again, watercolor is a transparent medium. If you're layering, say, blue on top of orange, those are contrasting colors. They sit across from each other on the color wheel. So if you layer it on top of each other and it's a lighter blue, you're going to get this brownish tint underneath. It changes the color. So it would have to be quite a darker amount or darker value of blue to really kind of mask that orange. So there's just these things that I look for, but I'm just going to kind of walk you through this one specifically. So I'm going to put it up on the screen right around here somewhere, and we're just going to start. Okay, so like I said, I like to kind of break it down sky and foreground, which is usually the land, and also starting with the lightest area, which in this case is the sky. So I'm going to, again, I'm not going to make it exactly the same. I'm going to get this yellow color and I'm going to mix it a bit with orange. Okay, and I'm just going to start off by doing this horizon line, and I'm just going to go right across. I know there's a mountain there, but we can layer the mountain. The mountain is slightly darker, but the same kind of shade as the sky. So we know that we can layer it. It's not going to change the color of the mountain. If the mountain was blue, like I said, and we were layering blue on top of this orange, it would turn it kind of greenish brown. So I want to make sure we're doing like a brownish mountain anyways. Okay. So I'm laying this color down to start. And then the sky slowly starts moving into this pink color at the top. So I'm just going to grab some permanent rose. And I'm using my bigger brush so I can get the most amount of paint and water on my paper. And I'm just going to blend it down. Okay, and then as it gets towards the top, it gets a little bit more purpley. So I'm going to wash off my brush, dry it. And I'm just going to add a little bit of purple over here. Okay. So there's our sky. Now, looking at the photo again, we can see that that background mountain, which is the lightest mountain, is kind of like this brownish color. It's like a yellowy brown. So, and it's also very crisp. It's not like out of focus or anything. So that also means that we have to do wet on dry, because if we do wet on wet, that's how you get this like kind of out of focus look, which we want a nice sharp look. I'm actually gonna mix a little bit more pink into the sky, I think, just for a little bit more color. Okay, so now we know that we need to wait for that to dry because we want to do a sharp mountain on top. So let's let this dry and then we'll come right back. Okay, so now that it's dry, we can do our faraway mountain, which is just this kind of like darker yellowish brown. So we can actually take our yellow here and then add a little bit of purple to it, and it will turn it this darker yellow. And I'm just going to do this mountain like this, very jagged. And I'm going to bring it down. And I'm just going to lighten it in color because we know we're going to have some blue mountains here. Again, if we're layering blue on top of orange, it's going to turn that greeny brown. And this mountain is a pretty nice dark blue. So you can even kind of just wash off your brush completely, dry it a bit, and then just kind of move it down. So it's blending out nicely, but it's not like a really sharp line is what I'm trying to say. I'm just moving it down a bit more. Okay, but it's really, really light. So if we layer that blue on top, we know it's not going to make too much of a big difference, okay? So I'm just blending it out nicely. And now we know that that next mountain is going to be the blue one. And it's also very nice and sharp. So we need to do another wet on dry. So we need to let this layer dry. I am going to try one thing. So it looks like in this photo that the sun is kind of coming over the mountains. So this is already kind of dry, but I'm going to see if I can kind of lift up some of the color just to get it like sun streaks kind of happening. So I'm just taking a wet, clean brush and just kind of scrubbing gently. Then I'm going to take my paper towel and I'm just going to lift a bit. So it looks like there's some lightness to it. I'm just gently scrubbing. So you can lift some areas of watercolor. Some paints lift better than others too. This isn't lifting too much. I'm just taking a clean wet brush and I'm just kind of scrubbing it, and then I'm lifting with my paper towel. And that just gives this kind of illusion that there's light shining from the sun behind over the mountain. Okay. And now the area that we need to paint on is dry, so I am going to do the blue now. So again, we're doing the blue here. There's not much color behind it, so it's not really going to change the color of that blue. And I think, yes. Okay, I have this Winsor blue here that is pretty nice. I'm going to darken it a bit with a little bit of indigo because it's on the darker side. There we go. And it's like a tree line. So I'm going to just start by actually, there is another part there. It's like purple, as you can see, right behind it. Now you can do that if you want. I don't know if I want to though, to be honest. I'm going to make this simpler. No, let's do it. Let's do it. Okay. So there's like a purpley blue behind, like a little tree line behind. So I'm just going to mix a little bit of purple with this blue. And I'm just going to do this little tree line. It's kind of in the middle. And I'm just going to do some little lines here. like there's trees. And I'm just gonna blend it out. Again, I know that putting this purple down is not going to change the color of the blue because purple and blue sit next to each other on the color wheel. So it will remain a similar color. It's not a contrasting color, so it's not going to be too big of a deal if they are layered on top of each other. I'm just going to make it a little bit more brownish purple. It's more like a muted purple. But again, the next layer is that blue, so we're just going to have to let this dry so it's a nice sharp line. And I always blend it out because we don't want a dark purple underneath there, just in that area. Okay, now that it's dry, now we can do our blue. So I'm just going to take that dark blue color and I'm just going to do our little mountain here. Like that. Okay, so you see how you can see some of those colors underneath? You can see a little bit of the orange, you can see a little bit of the purple. Now, here it's still pretty light, so that means we just need to go darker, meaning we need a darker value, more paint than water, okay? And that will just kind of cover that up. So you need to look when you're covering up or layering, can you cover it up with a darker value? And that's about it. Can you cover it up? I don't know if I'm making too much sense with this. Okay. So see how you can't really see that orange or anything underneath anymore? I might still, and also, sorry, I forgot to mention the trees in the foreground, those are really dark. So we know that we can layer those over almost any color because they're like almost black. They're like a dark green. So that will go over any of these colors in this landscape. So it's not too bad. You know that you can layer that. Okay, I'm just going to try and do some of those tree shapes. I'm just taking indigo because it's a nice dark blue. I might even grab a smaller brush in a couple minutes. I'm just doing these. Like that. And I'm just going to blend it out down here. Like so. I'm going to wash off my brush. I'm going to take my smaller size 2 brush, grab that dark blue, and you can even just do a little bit more detail of some of the trees if you'd like. Like I said, I'm not going to do too much detail on this. I'm just kind of try not to make it look like weird lines that are there, but okay. Okay, and there we go. And then the trees in the foreground, we're gonna have to let this completely dry and then we can do those. Okay, now we're on our last layer and we can do those dark trees. So I'm gonna take the darkest green I have, which is perylene green. And I'm even gonna mix it a little bit with my black, just to make it super dark so it goes right over that blue. And I'm just gonna take my size 2 brush. And actually, you know what? I'm going to, before let's start that, I'm going to take my size 12 brush, get a lot of that color on my brush just because it's pretty dense at the bottom of the picture. Just going to create that first, and then I'm going to have trees kind of coming up from this because it's pretty dense at the bottom, so you don't need to spend too much time doing detail. So we can just do some trees kind of coming up from here. And that's it. And there we go. There is our first landscape, okay? So that's kind of my process for that. Okay, so now let's say that a landscape has a lot of colors and it's just a little bit overwhelming. Okay, so again, we are going to start off with the lightest values, which we can see is in the sky, those bright yellow, and even those mountains of the blue, they're light blue. So that's where we're going to start. Now pick an area, either the ground or the sky, and start with one of those. I'm going to start with the sky. I'm going to put the picture up again. And that's where we're going to start. I have blue water, so I got to make sure that I am using water that is not blue so it doesn't get mixed up. Okay, so again, starting with yellow, our lightest bit. I'm just going to bring that up a bit because it blends nicely into an orange, which we know if we mix with like pink or red, it will blend nicely. So we can just blend that in. It's a similar kind of color palette, but this one just has a lot more colors. Okay, I'm just going to blend that in, but then it gets darker at the top. There's some more purple. So we're going to get darker there, even a little bit of like a darker color. I think I need to bring that pinkish orange down. Like that. Okay. And then again, we let that dry so they don't blend in to the mountains that need to be nice and crisp. Okay, so now we can move on to the mountains again. We are moving light to dark. So the background mountains are lightest blue, and then they slowly get a bit darker. But then as we move up here to the foreground, unlike this one where it was dark and you could just layer it over top, it's like this bright green. So we're actually going to block out this area. We're not going to paint here because we want that nice bright green. So let's start off with the light blue, and we're going to start off with our first layer. Okay, and I'm not going over top of that yellow. I'm trying my best not to. Okay, because it is I'm using a very light blue. And again, if you go over top, it's going to change the color of the blue. It actually make green, right? Yellow and green, layer over top, it would just change it. Okay, so there's our first light blue. Maybe make it a bit darker. And then we let that dry. Then we get our next blue, which is just going to be the same blue, but just a little bit darker. So using a bit more paint than water. Okay. I'm just going to blend it out so it has a nice blended out bottom there. Like that. And again, I'm still trying to maintain the white over here, so I'm just blending this out. Let that dry. And then there's another one that is slightly darker. I'm just going to add a little bit of green to this one. Like this. Okay, and I'm actually going to kind of just map out where that green foreground is. Okay, so it's going to be bright green over here. Okay. And then there's some, there's like texture and stuff in there. So I'm just going to, you can do like little trees and stuff in the background. Just tapping it in. Obviously not well. Like that. I'm going to let that dry and then we'll do the foreground. Okay, and now we're just going to take our bright green. It is a bit grayish over here. I don't know if I'm going to do that. I'm going to start over here. So we have this bright green. You can even make it brighter if you want to with yellow. And then it's a bit grayish over there. So I'm just going to take whatever dark color I kind of have over here and just make it grayish over here. And then you can do some of those trees in the background again. You can even just tap some of this darker grayish, bluish, greenish color in here because there are some darker bits on top. And we'll just blend it in. So we're doing some wet on dry, or so wet on wet. And it's just so it like blends a little bit more. And then once we do wet on dry, it's going to be a lot sharper. Okay, so let's let that dry. Okay, so now that that's dry, there are some darker green trees in the foreground. So then you can just, because it's darker, you know that you can just paint right over it. And you can do as many of them as you want, as detailed as you want. But that's just kind of my process for the whole thing, okay? So my tips are work light to dark always, and then keep track of the colors that you may be layering on top. You'll know if you can layer them or not based on whether they are contrasting colors or if they are not. It makes a huge difference. So keep that in mind. Again, if you're not positive about color theory and what colors you can layer on top of them, definitely check out my color wheel and my color theory or color mixing even playlist. I kind of go through everything over there that you need to know. But just for a quick recap, a color wheel, contrasting colors are the colors that sit directly across from each other on the color wheel. Mixed evenly, they will make brown. So if you try to layer purple over top of yellow, you're going to get a shade of brown. You try to mix or layer some red over top of green, you're going to get brown. Same with blue and orange. But if you want to layer, say, purple or blue on top of each other, as long as the one that you're layering on top is darker, it won't change the color too much. It may make it more of a tint, but there will be more harmony between it because these two colors are like color buddies, right? You can make a purple with blue and red. So it's not that big of a deal. But it's when you're using contrasting colors in layering, which is the issue. So there's that. You could definitely do tons more detail to this landscape, but that's just my process. Let's just take off the tape and make sure it looks okay. I mean, obviously there could have been a lot more done to this one. This was like the super quick version and it doesn't look exactly like the picture at all. But you guys get the gist of it. So I'm just going to quickly show you some other landscapes just to kind of give you an idea of where I would start. So say, again, these are all from Pinterest. So say you were doing a beach scene like this. Again, I would start between the light or again, I would start by separating the land and the sky. I usually tend to start with the sky, start with the lightest bit here, which is the yellow, and then blend the blue, let it dry. I would even mark out this big green area because if you were to layer this green on top of that orange, right, you would get some sort of, green and orange. They don't really sit next to each other. They're not necessarily across, but they would create some sort of brown if you did mix them because they're not directly side by side. Okay, so I would mark that out first, not necessarily the trees because the trees are so dark, you can just layer right on top of any color. But I would mark this green area out and then I would do sky and then I would do this part foreground here, working on the lightest bits first, like those warmer areas, the yellow and the blue. And then I would mark that back in. These ones are a little bit more tricky, but I suggest you start with a lot easier ones to start and then you'll kind of get the hang of it. When it comes to something like this, like flowers, so this is pretty tricky. This, honestly, I don't know if I would attempt this with watercolor too much because, again, orange and green mixed together would make a bit of a brown. So layering orange flowers on top of the green might be tricky. Some of the oranges that you can get, I think my cadmium orange is pretty opaque. So it actually might not be too bad to layer on top if the green is not too dark, but I would still, I don't know. I don't know how I'd approach this, to be honest. Maybe use gouache. I don't know. But those are just some tips that I have for painting from a reference photo. I hope they were helpful and you can ask me any questions below. Again, if you guys have any suggestions of tutorials you'd like to see in the future, let me know as well. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. I really hope you liked it and I hope you learned something. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and follow me on all my other platforms for tons more content. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you guys soon. Bye.